Good afternoon or evening, everybody, and welcome back to another tropical forecast here by Age Brother Forecast. And we have a lot to talk about. So, who would have thought we would have had three new AOIs within like 24 and 30 hours or so? That's exactly what just happened. We now have Invest 97L and Invest 98L, and we're most likely see Invest 99L within the next 24 hours or so. So, we're looking at August continuing to stay extremely active here, and there's a chance we can very well get easily eyed up and possibly continuing the list before September here. So keeping a very close eye on both these invests and soon to be another invest, which is the AOI down there in the Southern Caribbean. But before we get to the actual forecast, I will recommend you guys subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you guys can get notified when I do the latest updates here. But let's not get a look at the actual forecast. So here's a look here. I believe this is embedded 97L right here, which is the AOI basically, which is kind of in the northern portion of the MDR and likely to go into the central Atlantic and even possibly pose a threat there for Bermuda. But right now, we don't have much detail on MBES 97L really necessarily, and there's really not much model support like we have for 9 or more like for the AOI down there in the Caribbean. We actually have a lot more support for that one, which is not even an invest yet. But we have a broad area low pressure, which is kind of somewhat a part of a tropical wave here, which also is a part of where we have 98L, a pretty large open tropical wave. And basically, it's 700 miles west of Cabo Verde Islands there. Little development is expected during the next couple of days due to only marginally conducive ocean temperatures. As well, there is a little bit drier, necessarily close to the storm. Thereafter, however, some gradual development will be possible through the end of the week here while the system moves northwestward at 10 to 15 miles an hour over the central Atlantic. And this is a 10% for the next 48 hours and a 40% for the next 5 days. So here's now a look here at the as well 98L, which as well is a 10-40% here. And I do apologize, my screen's kind of cutting off that, but it's basically another area associated with the low pressure system, which is basically part of an open tropical wave, or basically an EAW, basically an easterly African wave, more than 500 miles to southeast of the Cabo Verde Islands. Some slow development will be possible over the next several days while the disturbance moves westward to northwestward at around 15 miles an hour over the eastern tropical Atlantic. So this one's going to be very interesting. It could very well possibly maybe be maybe an out to sea storm if it were to form, but obviously its strength would obviously then affect its track here. So who knows? I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be a threat for the Western Atlantic or anything like that. If anything's going to be a threat for the Western Atlantic, it's easily going to be this area of interest, which has a lot of model guidance here, including European CMC Icon and GFS here. And it's not just one run showing that, it's multiple runs. But these two IMBEs are rather interesting here. Actually, I think if anything, IMBES 97L has the least amount of model support, and anything, I think it has the worst overall conditions. While I think IMBES 98L has a pretty overall more conducive environment than 97L, and then we have the area of interest right here. So all of these have a 40% for 5 days, but this one right here has a 0% for 48 hours, but a 40% for 5 days. So here's a tropical wave located over the eastern Caribbean Sea. It's expected to form a broad area of low pressure over the southwestern Caribbean Sea by basically later this week here. It's exactly why it has a 0% for 48 hours, because it's just extremely disorganized and really does not have an area of low necessarily just yet. Thereafter, environmental conditions. Actually, let me refresh. I'm not sure if 5 o'clock came out. I've been doing this the whole time. 5 o'clock hasn't even. I haven't thought about 5 o'clock yet, even though it's 5:40. But nothing's really changed. Just refreshed it. But same thing, 0:40 here. Thereafter, environmental conditions are forecasted to become favorable for gradual development while the system moves west-northwestward over the northwest Caribbean Sea. And obviously, looks like we're going to be really watching out where kind of Grace May lamp on the southern bay of Campeche, watching that similar area for potentially this system here. Will any of these be Ida? I think it's most likely that the best chance of formation will come either from this new AOI or from 98L. 97L, I'm still very skeptical about, just considering the overall conditions now and in the future. I'm not ruling the possibility. I mean, it is a 40%, but again, I think out of all of them, these two are the most interesting here. So I think we can definitely easily get letter I from these three disturbances. Will we get further than that? That's exactly what we keep a close eye on. So before we actually get to the actual models and the assembles and all that, I'm just going to do a brief background of the overall condition across the Atlantic. So obviously, 98L is basically around here. 97L, this is obviously approximately, I'm not being exact here. 97L is basically just to the north. and then the new AOI is basically right here. So overall, they are in pretty consistent environment. However, the I guess the out of all three of these, the least favorable condition SST wise alone, not anything else, but SST wise, that Invest 97 now has the least favorable conditions. That's going to be kind of over 26 degrees Celsius water, and maybe at some point even 25 degrees Celsius waters as it heads to its projected path like that in the general region. While 98L kind of has a more conducive environment here, I guess to say that. Kind of has spots of over 28.5, maybe some areas of maybe getting close to 29. And then obviously extremely favorable condition SSC wise for the new AOI there with 28.5, 29, and even 30 degrees Celsius. So that's a little background on the overall SST. So keeping a close eye on all three of these. However, I'm really keeping an eye on the Western Caribbean AOI and as well on the AL. Let's now get a look at the overall ocean heat content conditions wise. We looked at the SST. Let's get a look at the overall ocean heat content. So obviously, out of all three, the most favorable conditions ocean heat content wise, and there's a good amount of energy stored within these waters. Obviously, going to be that AOI down there, which is likely to become 99L relatively soon here. It does obviously have areas of over 125 meters of obviously 80-degree plus waters, and that has a pretty big bubble. Like again, it's going to be heading to a very similar area where Grace went before going to Wave Camp Peach. You know, obviously we still have very warm waters and over 150 meters, and obviously further down of 80 plus degrees Fahrenheit. So overall, pretty good overall in conditions. So I'm not saying it's gonna be very well. I'm not saying it's gonna be big, but it's definitely the most intriguing when it comes to strength or potential. Obviously, not much ocean heat content ahead of 97L, but there is a few spots there of nearly 75 meters, and then obviously 98L has the least amount of ocean heat content because obviously it's not too common to get ocean heat content that deep or that much potential or I guess stored energy within the waters in the MDR like that. So let's now get a look at the actual SAL forecast. So obviously I think the biggest risk for any of these areas of interest will most likely be or biggest at risk for dry air, including SAL out of all three of this. Well, obviously, I think, in my opinion, would be Invest 97 now. I mean, just look at that massive SAL wave. I mean, that's extremely thick amount of dust, and that would just obliterate any tropical wave that tries to go anywhere near it. And obviously, I think at this point, let's see here, Invest 97L is basically like right on the edge. I mean, it's directly on the edge, and obviously, it's kind of maybe west-northwest, like somewhat like that. So, depending on the speed, I think that's going to really vary whether it lives or not, because obviously, I mean, it's basically heading directly towards its future path here. And we're obviously kind of getting a better idea, I mean, whether it's going to live or not, because this is within 19 hours or so getting into tomorrow afternoon here. So obviously, it's going to continue going to its track. So we're going to kind of go, once we get to the actual mall, we kind of get a better idea whether it's in a pretty favorable condition based on the dryer time frame and the actual track time frame. But you can kind of just see really that dryer just really rushes in here and going all the way by August 26th, heading the exact same path as Invest 97L and going directly towards areas near the west-northwest region and heading towards like basically Bermuda there. So that's going to be the one thing about Invest 97L, and obviously it does not have to go in the actual surface low to actually mess the whole storm up. It can obviously gradually and slowly get closer to the actual moisture bubble or the actual tropical wave and just absolutely obliterate it, and that shouldn't be a big threat within right now Invest 98L, because obviously it's actually pretty far south, all the way down here actually. I think it's like right down here. I mean, it's pretty extremely south actually. It's really not too common to have like Invest so far down there. I mean, typically like the limit's kind of like right here. I'd say maybe right here, and it's all the way like down here, I think. So it's obviously extremely close to the equator, but thankfully, obviously, it will become more conducive once it actually kind of goes a little bit sharper of a northwest turn instead of 97L. So you can kind of just see it's really not going to be the huge path of the SAL, and we're not going to have to worry about any really much SAL necessarily with 90 or with the AOI down here, because all the way kind of right here, very close to South America, and if it kind of goes directly westward like it's expected to, it's not going to be a massive threat, or SAL really won't be a massive threat. It's going to kind of just stay really south. And even if it does get pretty close to dryer, it's really not that thick. It's pretty thin overall, so it shouldn't be a massive threat, even if it gets really close. So here's a look here at Invest 98L here. So I'm actually going to look at Invest 98L first, because I think it obviously has more potential in 97. Now you can kind of see this thing has overall some good amount of low level circulation. Kind of looks like the low pressure is somewhat around the general vicinity. You can kind of see overall kind of that spin, so kind of going around that low, kind of clockwise. It somewhat looks like it's semi. It looks like it's semi kind of clockwise here. But you can kind of see overall good amount of convection, specifically towards the east of that low pressure, or west area of that low pressure. You see a really good amount of convection initiation there. Well, I see a few scattered storms and cloud tops kind of on the eastern side, but it's kind of overall very ugly looking. But it does have some good amount of vorticity. It has a good amount of surface and mid-level rotation overall. So I think it's pretty interesting already right now. Has a good amount of cloud tops. Has really a good amount of initiation beginning in the western quadrant. Even down the south portion of the quadrant, we're seeing a good amount of initiation down there. So overall, keeping a very, very close eye on this system here overall. So I think it's definitely going to be a pretty interesting system as it goes into a further conducive environment like stated by the National Hurricane Center. I think it's definitely something to keep a close eye on. Here's a look here, the overall model intensity guidance here for 98L, and obviously, typically we always see this happening with Invest, that all the models that jump on it, like NNIC and SHIP and all of that, they all kind of go over dramatic, and that's why 3 out of the 4 have this getting up to a category 1. And obviously, I mean, I wouldn't rule out the possibility, but it's super duper early on. There's really no agreement with anything like that. There's not even really much agreement towards it even forming, but there's potential, obviously, that it could very well form into at least a tropical storm. So they actually want to have it all form within 24 hours, and I think that that's a little early considering where it's at now in the overall conditions. But I wouldn't rule out the possibility if it does form somewhat down the road, before maybe Thursday or Friday. I mean, I'm just not gonna say 24 hours because I think there's obviously a pretty big jump there, and obviously considering how the first ensembles are in the first advisory, at least the first few advisories, they love going all out into a high-end tropical storm, category 1 or even category 2. So I wouldn't say this is not possible, but considering where we are right now and how early it's been since this became an invest, I'm not gonna say that's reasonable, because obviously we don't have much agreement within the models. The only thing we kind of really have is ensembles that are showing the low pressure in the track, but none of them as well are getting towards that. So we just have to keep a very close eye on whether it goes into a more conducive environment and whether tropical wave even survives as it goes further to the west northwest and then northwestward. So here's now a look here at the the area of interest right here towards portions of the Southern Caribbean. The low pressure is kind of somewhat within the general vicinity here, so obviously kind of a little bit harder to get an idea. But again, it says that the national kind of say there'd be more of a broad and actual, I guess, defined low pressure as it goes further into the northwest. But you can kind of to the northwest, obviously, including the Western Caribbean, obviously, not like northwest United States, but as it kind of goes more westward, I guess is what I meant. As it goes more westward into the Western Caribbean and to areas near Central America, we're going to watch out for a more defined and broad low. Right now, it's kind of really all over the place. A ton of initiation, a lot of convection, kind of all over the place within the tropical wave right here. And obviously, as well seen, it's a good lightning. But it looks like the overall actual low pressure within this cloud cover is really down here, really close to the obviously that's Colombia, so I think that's Venezuela. So very, very close to the Venezuela coast right there. So it's obviously kind of go westward, so it shouldn't be a big threat with any with it going south like Gonzalo did, obviously, because this has nothing to really go south for. It does not really have a trough taking it south. Doesn't have any dry air, kind of pushing it southward or anything like that. So overall, it should be pretty good. Obviously, it's not the best looking. It's actually pretty, just overall like a typical thing you see from a tropical wave. So want to see whether it gets act together in the next few days. So let's not get a look here at Invest 97 now. And obviously, this thing's not looking as good as 98L, but it looks kind of very similar. I guess you could say that towards Invest 90, towards Invest 90, or not even Invest, sorry, but it looks better than the AOI. I keep thinking that the one down there in the Caribbean, I keep thinking that one down there is an actual AOI, or an actual Invest, but I keep forgetting it's not an Invest. So what I was trying to say was, before I kind of blinked out, was that this is obviously better looking, or very similar looking towards that AOI down in the Caribbean there. So early on, the low pressure was kind of down here near 40 west and 19 north. You can kind of see the low pressure, and that's where we're seeing the most amount of overall vorticity. But as we now kind of go further on, looks like the low pressure is kind of really a little bit further north, where it looks like maybe around probably looks like the low pressure will be somewhere near maybe 41 degrees west and nearly 19 degrees south or north. Sorry, so that's kind of where we're looking at the low pressure itself. So you can kind of see overall, as well as some good convection, kind of overall popping up there within the last few runs before obviously it got dark, because obviously nighttime is approaching that general vicinity in the central Atlantic. Here's like the actual track, so it is expected to probably start going at a very sharp north, maybe very sharp and dramatic west northwest turn, so practically almost a northwestern turn. So obviously it's going to be something we have to watch out for as the dry air does approach, and whether that will obviously kill the tropical wave or not. Here's like the intensity guidance here as of 18Z, and again, they're kind of a lot less intense as of 98L. Now, obviously, makes sense because obviously this has a lot less potential than 98L. But a lot of the models want to have this form into a tropical storm, but within maybe like 72 hours to like maybe even 4 to 5 days out. So it's not much confidence really within it. Like I said, I'm really more interested in 98L and the AOI down there in the Caribbean, but still have to keep a close eye on 97L because it is still a medium chance there AOI. So you just have to keep a very close eye on all three of these. But out of all three, this one's my least of concerns, even though that one down there is not even an invest yet, but I think it will be quite soon here. And obviously, there's been a ton of model agreements and overall support with that. So that's why I'm kind of putting a AOI over an invest there, or at least a actual official invest. So let's not get a look here what the overall and some models are showing here for all of these, since obviously 18Z is just kind of just loading in right now. So wait for all the 18Z to get in from the GFS. So there we have invest, or not even invest, sorry. Oh my gosh, Adrian, it's not an invest. Here we have the AI down here, invest 97L, and then invest 98L. You kind of see a lot more models are actually jumping on 97L since it's kind of been an invest longer than all of these have kind of been on the actual website page. And there's 98L right there, obviously a ton of models as well jumping on that, having 1008, 1006 millibars. Then you kind of have a few over here getting to 1007, 1006, 1005. And then you can kind of see, then you really have it, you're really weakening and really just overall falling apart there. And then you kind of see a few models kind of jumping on there with the AOI kind of going all the way near Panama and portions there of Costa Rica. So they kind of have it going basically due west like that, which is actually what the National Hurricane Center showed. And then they have it kind of going northward like that, actually just kind of going straight northward and kind of just going around like the, I guess, skinning the Central American coast. And there you have a ton of malls all of a sudden start jumping off there on Invest 97L, and there you see a ton of malls obviously kind of keeping a close eye out there on 98L. But yeah, not a ton of malls really jumping on 98L. You kind of see just a few, maybe like 3 or 4, but obviously it's still very little support and so very early on, considering it was just an invest not too long ago. So we don't have to really worry about that. And you see just a ton of models all of a sudden start jumping on that new AOI and having it getting very close to areas like Cancun there and the Mexico Yucatan region, where obviously Grace hit not too long ago. And they have it kind of going into the Bay of Campeche, whether it's exactly where Grace went or all the way north, kind of going towards maybe Brownsville, Texas, or northern Mexico, getting as probably as high as 50 to 60 knots there. Actually, a few of these assembles want to get that AOI right down there, kind of rather strong, and even aiming it towards Texas. And oops, that was a really bad voice crack. Holy. Okay, you guys did not hear that. But what I was gonna say before that voice crack kind of just interrupted me is that there's a few models, actually 1 or 2, getting it heading towards Houston as like 70 knots. And honestly, I'm not gonna say it's not possible, but I'm just saying it's kind of very funny. But you can see a ton of models jump on this and having going to Bay of Campeche. So overall, we have a lot of agreements within these assembles. That's gonna go somewhere in the region of the western Gulf of Mexico, and then you kind of see a ton of models start to jump on there within 97L, kind of having really forming as low as like 970, 969 millibars. I mean, they really have it strengthening there. They got 986, 958. I mean, we have a few models getting into the 50s there, pressure wise, 950s. But yeah, that's just your daily dose of assembles, I guess you could say that. But yeah, that's what we have so far within the assembles. So all of 18Z just low for the GFS, or at least all of what we need, and it's definitely very interesting here, specifically for 97L, since basically this whole time I've been saying I don't see like it being like the best conditions and all of that. Obviously, before I even show you guys 97L and what the GFS wants, uh, again, it could very well be pretty big of a storm here. Like, let's say, obviously, be very similar based on what the GFS has right now, like being like Paulette or something like that. But it has overall a decent environment. But like I said, the thing is, will that dryer cut it off and all of that? And this is obviously just one GFS run, or based on what we just saw with the ensembles and all that. It looks like there's kind of a little bit of a beginning of a trend here. So let me go ahead and get to the actual run here. So they obviously have Inves 98L right there. They had 97L, and there is the AOI there in the Caribbean. So they see two high pressures there. Overall, very high pressure and overall very dry conditions across that general vicinity. And then you kind of see these low pressures kind of conjoin into a very smaller area. And there we have 97L on the very edge here, so very close to all that dry air and very ugly condition. And there you see the AOI over there. And then the AL just disappears. I mean, it looks like maybe the dry air gets the storm suffocated, basically, which we'll look at deeper in the video. And there we have the AOI there in the Caribbean. Looks like it went due west and very close to Nicaragua and Honduras border. And then it goes up, basically skinning the coast, and becomes a pretty overall good storm there, 999 millibars, and hitting areas near Yucatan. And then look what happens with Inves 97L. It goes to 1,008 millibars, then 987 just very quickly. I mean, the GFS one has is kind of do like a Paulette strength or something like that. There you see the high pressure right here kind of shifts a little bit further to the west here, and then we have another ridge up here. So this is going to be steering it kind of this way, and then we have a high pressure kind of putting it that way. So it's basically going to be between areas of really high pressure and dry air. And this is going to be like the best path for it where there's not much shear there or upper level shear really. So this is going to be the best path where they go between these two high pressures. So it's going to be overall very, 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 very tight. However, the GFS Pomona has is a perfect area there. 964 millibars. I mean, obviously, did not even have the storm at all forming the last run. And then they want to navigate to like a major hurricane status, and then that's very interesting. Then look at Invest or the AOI there, 998 millibars in the Bay of Campeche. Then it gets to 991, and then it makes landfall there at 992 in Mexico. So overall, the 18Z JFS runs quite interesting. Look at the CMC here. This is 12Z. They're also being very consistent with showing their Invest or that new AOI down there, getting it, I believe, to the 990s there, making landfall in the same exact area as the 18Z GFS. And even the CMC there showing a pretty intense storm there for 97L. They're doing very similar, kind of really, really weak here and very ugly. So I wouldn't doubt if that chance for 48 hours remains quite low to a 10 or 20% for the next few days here. I mean, I would not doubt that stays really rather low, while the 5 days really skyrockets, and you see very similar kind of blows up there within two high pressure. How that ridge that the CMC has up there is a lot farther north there, all the way into Canada. So it looks like it will kind of stay. But again, then the high pressure kind of really dips southward, so it's not going to really go further north or anything like that. But again, 978 millibars is what the CMC is having here. And again, they also really have nothing at all with 98L. They kind of just have 98L just dissipating. And Icon, see what Icon has for 18Z. And they also kind of have this turn to becoming a monster, 971 millibars. So there is a ton of malls having extreme consistency with 97L being an absolute monster. So kind of had to really keep a close eye on that. Thankfully, it will most likely be an out-to-sea storm. And then as well, Icon showing there. Probably that new AI down there as well forming. And then let's look at the European here. So let's go to the vorticity here. I mean, look what they're showing with the vorticity here. I actually have not checked vorticity. I mean, look at that monster they're showing here. I mean, that's just an absolute monster. And then they obviously really have, there's looking at the new AOI, and then there's 97L. Actually, let's see what the European wants to say here. As well, European, very similar, has a really good storm there. Overall, pretty good storm going on. According to the European. But let's now go and get a look here at what the CMC wants to have here for the vorticity. And they're also kind of showing it getting quite strong. Actually, it looks like they had a lot larger vorticity signature than what the GFS is showing, as well as very similar. So this is the CMC and GFS are rather similar to what they're showing here. Look at the wind shear forecast. So there we have a tut right there to the north there of, let's see here, the EOI down there. It's gonna be a little bit sheer. However, it looks like the GFS is supporting really little shear in the upper level, so it shouldn't be seeing any tilting vortex. So it shouldn't really hurt the AOI over there or anything like that. Especially as well as GFS has been hinting towards a upper level anticyclone for the past few days. So it looks like this could very well be the main protecting factor. And obviously, as the tuck kind of moves further northward, just dies, we're gonna be seeing a good chance for this storm to really form. There you see that upper level anticyclone right there. You kind of see how really little shear the actual low pressure is. You kind of see this really divergent shear going all over the place there. So basically, yeah, you can kind of see an upper anticyclone really that's going to help protect and probably conduce the environment furthermore for this system. But there you can kind of see a pretty strong trough associated very closely, and that's really probably thinking, oh, there's a ton of shear there, 40 knots, blah blah blah. But again, that's gonna kind of just be in the really lower levels specifically, but in the upper levels, there's gonna be very little shear to actually hurt that storm. Let's look now at the overall conditions there for 97L. Not really crazy shear wise. Again, as it goes further northward into the region near Bermuda, that's when it's gonna have it start encountering that shear, but it really won't have a really big threat necessarily with shear for a little bit. Obviously, there will be a few spots there and overall, but it shouldn't be a big threat until it actually gets close to this high pressure there. So there you see kind of that trough and then the ridge, and there's that really strong dip in the gesturing there. There's a high pressure, there's a low pressure, and there's a high pressure again up there. So it's gonna really push. This is you can just see that extreme Rossby wave. That's a really strong Rossby wave, and that's gonna push this storm, kind of keeping it from going near Canada and all of that. And then you see this other kind of trough and ridge there, kind of keeping it checked. And it's exactly what's gonna have it be such a conducive environment, even though it's so close, because it's gonna keep it in that very good environment and alley of very little shear there. So that's exactly why the models have it going such strong strength. And let's now get a look at the 18Z here for 200 millibar shear, and as well as see what they have here. So, again, there's really not much interest within the 8Ls and 12Z runs. There you see the TUT, but overall look at the upper level anticyclone there. Even like in the next few hours, you can kind of see there that it's spurring or divergent kind of shear going all over the place and just, I guess, rolling out like that. That's exactly where you see the ULAC. And then again, there you see that big jet in the jet stream there, really pushing down on that storm for 97L, and there you see as well the kind of doing the jet stream down here as well. But there's really not going to be much upper level shear to really worry about necessarily. Maybe 20 knots, but again, that's really not going to be a pretty big threat, especially if this thing doesn't have a ULAC associated with it.